So one of the first things to understand if you want to optimize your hormones is that testosterone can reduce anxiety, promote novelty seeking, and promote competitive interactions. The release of these steroid hormones from the adrenals, in particular testosterone and some of its related derivatives, are mainly activated by competition. Pretty interesting. There's a lot of evidence in animals and humans that competitive scenarios, at least short-lived competitive scenarios, can liberate testosterone from the adrenals. So let's talk about competition. Competition is a powerful influence on the sex steroid hormones, and the sex steroid hormones powerfully influence competition. So most people don't realize this, but most males of a given mammalian species never get to reproduce. And we don't often think about that, but testosterone plays a powerful role in determining which members of a given species will get to reproduce, which ones of that species will actually get access to females. And so here I'm not talking about humans specifically, but it's well known in species like elephant seals, in species like antlered animals and rams, for instance, that the higher levels of testosterone correlate with access to females. One interpretation of this is that the females are detecting which males have high testosterone and selecting them. They're more receptive to them. But it's actually more so that the males that have higher testosterone forage further and will fight harder for the females. And this is really interesting because there's very good evidence now that testosterone can reduce anxiety, promote novelty seeking, and promote competitive interactions. Just stay with me because there's a little bit of biology here that makes it all make sense. And it turns out to be pretty simple. We have a brain region called the amygdala. The amygdala is most famous for its role in fear. We hear a lot about fear and the amygdala. The amygdala is really involved in threat detection. It sets our thresholds for anxiety and what we consider scary or too much. Testosterone, secreted from the gonads and elsewhere in the body, binds to the amygdala and changes the threshold for stress. Testosterone has this incredible effect of making effort feel good. Testosterone increases generally lead to more foraging, more novelty seeking, increases in libido, and increases in desire to mate. And dopamine and testosterone have a remarkable interplay in the body. Dopamine is actually released in the brain in ways that has the pituitary, this gland that sits over the roof of your mouth, release certain hormones that then go on to promote the release of more testosterone. And indeed, winning promotes more dopamine and later more testosterone. However, in the short term, just competing increases testosterone independent of whether or not you win or lose. Now let's talk about heat and cold. There seems to be some excitement about lately for other reasons, but that can actually have some pretty profound influences on testosterone. So everyone should realize that temperature and day length are linked. Temperature and day length and sunlight, those are all intimately related because of the systems that we evolved in. Nowadays, there's a lot of interest in using cold as a way to stimulate testosterone. That and things like ice baths and cold showers can have positive effects on the sex steroid hormones. What happens is there's a rebound in vasodilation after cooling. So cooling causes vasoconstriction, and then after the cooling, there's a rebound vasodilation, and there's more infusion of blood into the gonads. So now let's talk about how exercise in its various forms, weight training, endurance work, weight training to failure, or less intense weight training, can impact testosterone levels. If you look on the web, people say, oh, testosterone is increased by weight training. You want to do big, heavy compound movements, squats and deadlifts and chins and things of that sort. When you go into this literature, it's kind of hard to find real mechanism. You see a lot of effects. You'll hear things like androgen receptor content, meaning testosterone and its derivatives, receptor content following heavy resistance exercise. And you'll find some examples that, for instance, they do muscle biopsies. They can actually see receptor increases, looking at either high volume or low volume, really intense exercise. And you can find a lot of that, but not a lot of mechanism about how the nervous system would do this. And the reason you'd want to know how it can do it is that you could potentially build better protocols or figure out exactly what about these movements is triggering increases in androgen receptors and testosterone. So what's interesting is when you start digging into the more mechanistic studies, what you find is that heavy weight training, so this is weight training where the sets are done with anywhere from, kind of 1 to 8 rep range. So this translates differently depending on ratio of muscle fiber type and so forth. But where basically people are working at anywhere from like 70% to 95% of their maximum, or sometimes even going right down to their 1 repetition maximum. What you find is that using the nervous system in a way in which they're moving heavy loads. So that I would translate to recruitment of high threshold motor units for you muscle physiologists. There's a rule in muscle physiology about the neuron recruitment for moving muscles where you basically use the minimum number of motor units of neurons to activate muscle as you possibly can. As loads increase, you have to recruit more and more neurons. You always hear about recruiting muscle fibers, but really it's recruiting more neurons to recruit more muscle fibers. What you find is that heavy weight training, but not weight training to failure, where completion of a repetition is impossible, leads to the greatest increases in testosterone.